Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is Andrew Kirchhoff, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, we're talking about my must-draft running backs for the 2021 fantasy football season. On today's episode, I'm going to be talking about 3 running backs in specific who I believe are being criminally undervalued going into our 2021 fantasy football drafts. These are running backs that are on pace to potentially be workhorse guys, touching the ball upwards of 16 to 18 times per game, that are being drafted outside of the first 2 rounds of your 2021 fantasy football leagues. Now, the reason I wanted to specifically highlight these 3 players was because yesterday during my live mock draft video, I employed the strategy of making sure that I lock down my 2 stud running backs within the first 2 rounds of my draft. Now, that always isn't going to be the case. Based on where you select, the value of potentially drafting a tight end or a wide receiver is going to be far more beneficial to your team. So if in fact you have to go ahead and draft yourself a Travis Kelce that drops to you, or a Justin Jefferson that comes down and is at such great value that you can't ignore it, then you go ahead and you take that wide receiver or tight end and then opt to taking some of these running backs later in your draft. The 3 running backs I'm going to be talking about today are Carson, Darrell Henderson, and Mike Davis. These are 3 guys that are being drafted in the 3rd, 4th, and 5th rounds of our 2021 fantasy football draft. So I'd like to give perspective in the idea that not only can Carson return to RB1 relevancy, but there's a chance of guys like Darrell Henderson and Mike Davis having breakout seasons as the full-time starters of their respective teams, which at times they've not been given that opportunity in their career. Of course, Mike Davis coming off a pretty good year in Carolina, but what are they going to do once he's given all the touches in an Arthur Smith offense? We'll talk about my perspective and my thoughts going into this upcoming season. Now, before we begin today's video, I want to once again take an opportunity to thank you guys for the incredible support. For those of you who have been with the channel since its conception, you guys have been here for a while and you've seen me grind year after year trying to improve my channel as much as I possibly can. And we're going in full speed into the 2021 season. I've already started posting every single day, and I don't plan on stopping that for the entirety of this upcoming season. I want to make sure you guys have every possible edge you can have in your upcoming season so you can win your leagues this year. Now, without a doubt, you guys have supported the channel by coming, viewing, commenting down below, clicking that like button, which is absolutely clutch, and of course sharing with family and friends. I know it's difficult to do so because you may be giving them an advantage, but sharing the channel makes a world's difference, and I really do appreciate you guys doing so and giving me more exposure. Regardless, if you have not yet already, make sure you click that subscribe button. Like I mentioned, fantasy football content on the daily for the entirety of the 2021 season. You can find it here on this channel to help you win a fantasy football championship this upcoming season. Let us begin by talking about Carson, running back of the Seattle Seahawks. Like I mentioned earlier, again, the reason you would potentially grab a running back in the 3rd round like Carson is if, for example, a wide receiver or a tight end is, potentially fallen to you in your draft, and they are far more valuable than the essential running backs that are left on the board. You would draft a wide receiver and come back around in the 3rd round and grab a clutch player like Carson. Maybe even, in fact, you're trying to run an RB heavy draft in which, again, you draft 3 running backs off the rip and then go ahead and address the following positions: wide receiver, tight end, and quarterback with the rest of your picks. And that's always a viable strategy. But either way, I really do love Carson as a 3rd round ADP right now. The amount of value he's presenting, and I understand a lot of people have hesitancy with him considering the injury last season, but this is a stud running back that has proven year over year that with this Seattle Seahawks offense, he's given not only the ample opportunity, but has the skill to back it up. In specific, let's talk about the stats that are on screen. Carson from 2018 to 2020, since he took the job as the starting running back of the Seattle Seahawks in 2018 against that Dallas game, I think he had like 30 carries. It was an insane performance. But regardless, since he took the job, he's averaged 15.45 fantasy points per game in a half PPR scoring format. In that time span, he's played 35 games. In those 35 games, he's averaged 20.12 touches per game, 98.8 yards per game, which is at a 4.54 yard per carry average, and 0.77 touchdowns per game. And of those 35 games that he's played, 77.14% of those games have produced 10 plus fantasy points. So again, he has shown consistency year over year. And though sometimes there are tough matchups and there are games where Russell Wilson's cooking and they're not really getting him involved in the running game, Carson has still been a reliable fantasy back. I mean, just in the last 3 seasons, he has finished in 2018 as the number 15 overall running back, 2019 as the number 11 overall running back, and in 2020 as the number 17. Again, he's dealt with injury and he's missed, consistent time, but he has still managed to be a top running back option because, again, besides the fact that he's getting the opportunities, he is getting work in the passing game. yes, let's say, for example, you're getting 20 plus touches and they're all on the ground. Though that is incredible and those are workhorse numbers, we want to see our running backs get work in the passing game. And that's absolutely what Chris Carson has done in his career. I mean, just in 2020, if we go ahead and just isolate those statistics, Chris Carson, of course, in the 11 games that he played that he did not sustain an injury and had to leave early, he averaged 14.97 fantasy points per game. In those contests, he averaged 3.73 targets per game and 3 receptions per game. If you take those 11 game statistics and you expand it to a 16-game season, he would have had 60 targets and 48 receptions. Now, the reason why I wanted to, specifically point out that total was because throughout the season, yes, Chris Carson dealt with injury. He played a little bit in the beginning, missed some time in the middle, and then he came back at the end. The running back position of the Seattle Seahawks, whether he was in the lineup or not, was still producing almost identical, consistent numbers. Now, I'll explain to you exactly what I mean. So, Chris Carson last season was the starting running back and the full-time guy 11 times last year out of the 16 games. Carlos Hyde twice, DJ Dallas twice, and Alex Collins once. That's a 16-game season. When those guys started in those respective weeks that they played, the starting running back of the Seattle Seahawks averaged 14.92 fantasy points per game. And on top of it, in those games that they started, they totaled 60 targets and 49 receptions. Those are the exact 16-week numbers that Carson was averaging. So again, the amount of stats that are going to the starting running back of this team are almost in lockstep with one another, no matter who's even there. So again, I have a lot of confidence, not only because of the talent of Chris Carson and what he's been able to prove since 2018, but the fact that the Seattle Seahawks running backs are getting so much value and so much work throughout a 16-game season. As long as Chris Carson can stay healthy, even play 14 games, he is going to be an extremely valuable asset at his current ADP. I wanted to continue, and I want to talk about the entire rushing aspect of the Seattle Seahawks team. We've heard a lot of Pete Carroll, banging the table saying that he wants to run the ball more this upcoming season. Of course, they bring in Waldron, the offensive coordinator, formerly of the Rams. He was the passing coordinator there. He's come in. He's going to take over the offensive coordinator job for the Seattle Seahawks, try to give a little bit of new life to this offense. Either way, Pete Carroll wants to run the ball more, and I don't blame him. To be honest, since 2018, the rushing attempts from this team have gone down dramatically. I mean, in 2018, they ran the ball with the running backs alone 451 times. In 2019, that number decreased by 55 to go to 396. And then from 2019 to 2020, we dropped another 80 to 316. So again, we've seen a 135 rushing attempt decrease in just the past couple seasons. So again, if they want to get back to running the ball, they can certainly do so. They don't even have to give all those touches to Chris Carson. You can get Rashad Penny involved, and as long as it's going to, give more targets at least around in this backfield, it'll give Chris Carson the ability to not only have, maybe potentially even stay healthy for a full season, but he's still going to be the goal line back. He's still going to be the guy that's getting a lot of work in the passing game, and I'm not even worried about it. Again, this is a team that wants to run the ball, and they're going to consistently do so, and I hope that they're going to continue to buy in on that potential. Now, of course, we know the running game is almost entirely attached to the offensive line and their productivity. I know the offensive line of the Seattle Seahawks has not been a consistent member of this team. They've definitely been a sore spot for many of the fantasy prospects on this team, specifically Russell Wilson. Of course, if he's not getting time in the pocket, he's not going to be able to at least progress through his reads and make the right decisions. But either way, they've somehow managed to survive with, an underwhelming offensive line, to say the least. But with that said, I do believe the left side of this offensive line is more than capable of being able to help Chris Carson a significant amount for seasons to come. Again, Damian Lewis and Duane Brown. This is the left tackle and left guard combo of the Seattle Seahawks. Lewis was the 7th highest graded offensive guard in the National Football League, according to Pro Football Focus last season. And Duane Brown was the 13th highest graded offensive left tackle, according to Pro Football Focus last season. I wanted to see just how valuable those two were to Chris Carson's potential. And I went and looked at when, in fact, Chris Carson ran to the left side of the offensive line, so meaning the left B gap, C gap, and even outside of the tight end. Chris Carson was averaging 5.3 yards per carry last season running in that direction. Those two guys are going to be a huge part of this offensive line. And I know a lot of people talk, smack about them, but that's mainly because of the pass blocking. If, in fact, they're running the ball downhill and Chris Carson is the lead back, they're going to find success. And I think, again, with the amount of value Chris Carson has shown over the last couple seasons, it's kind of hard to, pass him up in that third round, even if he's dropping even further. The last thing I wanted to mention before we move on to a running back like Darrell Henderson within the same division is I want to talk about Chris Carson versus the NFC West when he plays against the Rams, the 49ers, and the Arizona Cardinals. In the last 3 seasons since 2018, when playing against the NFC West, teams that he plays against 6 times out of the 16-game schedule, he's averaged 15.09 fantasy points per game. Again, incredible numbers. He has always shown his consistency throughout the entire season. Again, this is a running back that very easily can be in that low-end RB1 conversation because of the opportunities, not only on the ground, but through the air. The touchdowns are going to be there. This is a team that wants to run the ball more. And of course, they're part of one of the top offenses in the National Football League that is only going to improve year over year with the amount of talent they have. But regardless, I think Chris Carson is a must-draft, the guy that you should definitely be looking after going into your 2021 fantasy football draft. Now we'll go ahead and move on to our next running back here, Darrell Henderson of the Los Angeles Rams. I know I was just talking about the NFC West, so let's go ahead and let's talk about the Rams. I know I was mentioning him a lot in yesterday's live mock draft. I really do believe Darrell Henderson is going to be a fantastic selection this year. Prior to Cam Akers going down, I had Cam Akers ranked as my number 8 overall running back in half PPR scoring formats. I was going all in on Cam Akers based on his opportunity that he was given last season and the productivity we've seen from stud Rams running backs. I mean, it is an undeniable fact that the running backs for the Rams since Todd Gurley have been great. I mean, it's a part of the Sean McVay offense that they want to go ahead and they want to feed one running back. And though last season they didn't show that to begin, it was more of a process of dealing with injuries and finally establishing that RB1, which ended up being Akers. And unfortunately, he is out with an Achilles injury. And that is why we're talking about a guy like Darrell Henderson as it currently stands, because Darrell Henderson will have potentially the full opportunity and workload of the Los Angeles Rams backfield, which is an unbelievable amount of said opportunity. First and foremost, Darrell Henderson last season, he did play and he was the starter for a pretty good chunk of time. In fact, from weeks 2 through 7 of the 2020 season, in the 5 games that he had 14 plus touches, he averaged 15.14 fantasy points per game and was the number 13 overall running back from weeks 2 through 7. So when given the opportunity, he was absolutely delivering on it, not only on the ground, of course, scoring touchdowns, but through the air. This is a great receiving back, and when you bring in a guy like Matthew Stafford, I know Matthew Stafford's dealing with a little bit of a thumb injury, but it'll be far more significant in this offense in comparison to Jared Goff. I mean, when you compare Jared Goff and how many times he targets running backs in the last 2 seasons in comparison to a Matthew Stafford who's far more comfortable in doing so, I could easily see Darrell Henderson getting himself up there in the totals of targets and or receptions. When he was given the opportunity in 2020, he delivered. Another running back delivered in the same capacity was Cam Akers. If, in fact, we go look at what Cam Akers was capable of doing once they gave him the starting position. Of course, they drafted him to be the starter of this team from weeks 13 through 19. Now, what exactly does that mean? That's literally weeks 13 through the second round of the actual NFL playoffs because, again, the momentum didn't stop there. He averaged 15.38 fantasy points per game, which was 23.83 attempts per game, 118 total yards with a 4.25 yard per carry average and 0.5 touchdowns per game. Again, the amount of opportunity that Cam Akers was given wasn't by accident. He was delivering on it because anybody you put in this backfield is going to produce. In fact, even Malcolm Brown last season was producing on a consistent basis. Similar to how I talked about the Seattle Seahawks. When you go ahead and you looked at the starting running back from weeks 1 through 17 for the Rams of the 2020 season, you'll see that Malcolm Brown was a starter 5 times, Darrell Henderson 5 times, Cam Akers 6 times. Now, if you go ahead and you take their individual weeks and average them out on a 16-game basis, the starter of the Rams last season averaged 13.55 fantasy points per game. Those are great numbers. Even with Malcolm Brown in there, they were scoring touchdowns, getting work in the passing game, and the consistency was absolutely there. Speaking of consistency, first and foremost exists in fantasy football because of said opportunity. The opportunity I wanted to mention is rushing attempt. In the last 3 seasons, the Rams have finished as the number 4, the number 20, and the number 7 overall teams in terms of total rushing attempts to running backs, with 371, 334, and this past season, 384. Again, the opportunity is there. In terms of the passing game, the amount of targets they've had, sure, they haven't been the best, and in fact, they've been amongst the lower half of teams. They've still given their running backs 97, 61, and 71 total targets. In terms of total opportunity, they rank amongst the top 12 2 out of the last 3 seasons as the number 11 and the number 12 in 2018 and in 2020. So when they're giving their running backs the opportunity, of course they're going to deliver on it because they're giving the utmost of opportunity. This is elite level opportunity, and it doesn't stop there. When you're giving your running backs this kind of volume, of course, you should anticipate this kind of volume down in the red zone. In the last couple seasons, specifically from 2018 to 2020, the Los Angeles Rams are only behind the New Orleans Saints and the Green Bay Packers in total running back touchdowns. That's 57 touchdowns from the Rams running backs. There's only, behind, Alvin Kamara's and Aaron Jones, who of course, they've had insane touchdown numbers as of the last 3 seasons. But nonetheless, the Rams have competed there, and they're ready to give a singular running back in the name of Darrell Henderson all of the possible opportunity he could want. I mean, let's not forget Todd Gurley in 2017, 2018, a little bit in 2019. I mean, he was given great opportunity down in the red zone. In fact, led all running backs in 2017 and in 2018 combined in rushing attempts inside the 5-yard line. When this team gets down there and their offense is hot and moving, they want to hand off the ball. Darrell Henderson is certainly going to be able to do so, and he'll find himself in the end zone multiple times this season. I certainly do believe there is a very valid opportunity for this team to be in a situation where Darrell Henderson has double-digit touchdowns, over 1,000 receiving yards, and is getting himself potentially 30 catches this season for a bunch of yards. So why not invest in him? I mean, he's going in the 4th, 5th round. The only hesitation as of right now is whether or not the Los Angeles Rams sign another running back. Do they go out and trade for Marlon Mack? Do they go ahead and bring in another running back like Le'Veon Bell? If in fact they do, then sure, this entire argument and conversation, you can wash it away. And at least we did it early in August. But if in fact we get to the late August season and we're beginning to draft and there's nobody else in this backfield, I expect Darrell Henderson's ADP to rise. And if and when it does, you're going to wish you had invested in him far earlier, because again, the amount of upside a Rams running back has and the amount of opportunity that he's going to be given this year, man, it's undeniable. All right, let's move on to our final running back for today's episode, Mike Davis. Mike Davis, formerly of the Carolina Panthers and now the starting running back of the Atlanta Falcons. The reason I wanted to mention Mike Davis is because he's currently going late 4th, late 5th. I mean, I've seen him kind of move around, maybe even sometimes in the 6th rounds, depending on the scoring format. I've seen him jump around late in drafts. And to be honest, I think he's kind of like the last workhorse back you can grab before that next tier of player where it's just a complete RBBC mess. When we talk about Mike Davis, we're not only talking about a running back that definitely has weight and can truck people, but we're talking about an athletic guy that has caught the ball a lot in his career. Now, of course, going from the Carolina Panthers to the Atlanta Falcons is going to be a big shift. But ultimately, Mike Davis has been a very valuable fantasy asset as of the 2020 season, and even going back to 2018 with the Seattle Seahawks. Last season, Mike Davis finishes a number 15 overall running back in fantasy, but if we went ahead and just looked at his overall productivity in the 13 games that he played without Christian McCaffrey there taking away touches, he averaged 13.13 fantasy points per game. In those games, of course, he had himself 64 targets and 54 receptions. That's incredible numbers that I don't know if he's going to get that opportunity in 2020. I'm hoping that there's a potential of that. I mean, when we look at what Matt Ryan has done with running backs as of the last couple seasons, 198 total targets to running backs. I mean, we could see ourselves getting some pretty good numbers there if in fact Matt Ryan continues to target running backs, which he's done throughout his entire career. I mean, we have to just go back to Devontae Freeman, Tevin Coleman. He absolutely loved targeting them in the passing game because it gave him more opportunity to just dump the ball off and not have to worry about throwing it into double coverage and making mistakes. Now, in terms of who Mike Davis is filling the shoes of, I mean, there really isn't much competition in this team. Again, let's think about what their depth chart looks like. Quandre Ollison, he barely had any touches last year. Cordero Patterson, they drafted a rookie in the 5th round. They didn't bring anybody else in free agency. Mike Davis is the starting running back of this team. So what could we potentially see him walk into? What does the situation look like? Todd Gurley last year proved to us that this running back position isn't even that bad of a fantasy asset. We're talking about Todd Gurley with one kneecap, maybe even not even one kneecap, a half of a kneecap, running around from weeks 1 through 9 of the 2020 season, averaging 14.2 fantasy points per game, and was the number 6 overall running back throughout that span of time. That's a pretty big contribution. So if you go ahead and plug in Mike Davis, you got yourself ample opportunity and health that is going to have far more longevity than what Todd Gurley had, eventually falling off the cliff last season. Now, the offensive scheme is not going to be the same. It's going to be enhanced. Again, Dirk Cutter has been the offensive coordinator for the Atlanta Falcons over the last couple of seasons. Of course, they completely changed the entire coaching staff, bringing in Arthur Smith, formerly the offensive coordinator of the Tennessee Titans. He is now going to serve as the head coach and, of course, the play caller of this team. And the difference between these two offenses is, of course, how much Arthur Smith loves to run the ball and use play action. Arthur Smith with the Tennessee Titans in 2019 and 2020 proved to us that his schemes are one wide receiver, one tight end, one running back. Those are the guys that he wants to feed. He fed A.J. Brown, he fed Jonnu Smith, and then Derrick Henry. He has the exact kind of setup at a budget version in Atlanta, with the idea that he has Davis, who's definitely a budget version of Derrick Henry, but he has improvements with Ridley over a guy like A.J. Brown and Kyle Pitts over a guy like Jonnu Smith. I really do believe Arthur Smith's offense can find a lot of success. And I know the offensive line play of the Atlanta Falcons has had a little bit of shakiness due to injuries. I know a couple years back they drafted 2 first-round offensive linemen and they haven't really panned out fully because of the injuries that they've sustained. But if they can go ahead and find stability and find comfort in the scheme of running the ball consistently and even giving the opportunity to Matt Ryan to use more play action, to not be forced to throw the ball for the entirety of a second half of a game, we could see even more value. But hey, if this team wants to throw the ball for the entire second half of a game, why not? Mike Davis is an incredible receiving back, and he'll certainly get a lot more work than a lot of people anticipate. The last couple points I wanted to make in regards to Mike Davis was, of course, his talent and what he was able to produce last season. He didn't play the full game in week 2. Of course, he came in the second half when Christian McCaffrey went down. He only had 1 rushing attempt in that game, but 8 targets, 8 receptions. There are things that he was able to do last season that at times were confusing to me. I thought to myself, how is a guy like this, who was a backup running back, filling in a role like Christian McCaffrey so seamlessly? And though Christian McCaffrey, of course, is far more talented, Mike Davis did a lot with the opportunity he was given. I mean, per attempt, Mike Davis forced, I think, the second most missed tackles in the entire National Football League outside of Nick Chubb. I mean, that in itself speaks volumes. He had the same amount of yards per carry after contact than running backs like Alvin Kamara and Jonathan Taylor. When you put those into perspective, and the fact that Arthur Smith led an offense last season that had the most rushing attempts in the National Football League with 463, and the season before that had the 10th most rushing attempts with 368. I know they're not going to give, of course, they're not going to give Mike Davis 400 carries, but the opportunity's there. This offense is built to succeed, and I think we're going to find a lot of success with Mike Davis. And I know Davis's current ADP currently sits around the 5th and 6th round, RB24 in a half PPR scoring format. I mean, to be honest, if you can wait on a running back, maybe potentially address 2 running backs early and come back in the 6th round, late 5th round, and select a Mike Davis for your flex position, I have a lot of confidence in that. I mean, especially in a standard format, half PPR, those are great options. Full PPR, he's built for it. He is a guy that can easily catch himself 50 balls this season and prove himself to be not the RB24, where a lot of people are drafting him. He can be a lot more valuable. But hey, I'm not saying draft him extremely early. I'm saying invest in where he's going right now, because where he's going is going to present you a lot more value in your fantasy leagues. Either way, these are the 3 must-draft running backs I wanted to mention. Again, the must-draft list doesn't stop here. There are going to be other running backs that I talk about, wide receivers, quarterbacks, tight ends, throughout the entirety of this offseason. Make sure, again, you click the like button down below, subscribe. And until tomorrow, we'll be talking about some various topics. We'll see. Thank you, everybody, for watching, and I'll see you guys. Peace.